Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts, what goes on in their minds, how they approach their work, and how they make it pay. The podcast also looks at the role that photography and filmmaking plays in helping to raise awareness about the global plight of species, and despite the depressing statistics, we look for solutions at what we can all do to contribute to conservation. All my guests give up their precious time and are incredibly generous of spirit. So this is my chance to share these conversations with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. This week, my guest is Marcus Westberg. Marcus is a photographer and writer dedicated to sharing diverse conservation stories across Africa, Asia, and in his native Sweden and Europe. We caught up from his home in Portugal to talk about his beginnings in Africa, the enjoyment he gets from the wide variety of work he undertakes with NGOs, and we even touch a little on AI and the future of photography. I hope you enjoy this one. Here's Marcus. Marcus.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks for taking the time to come on. And actually, I feel it's long overdue you coming on the podcast because you've been, well, really a big fan of the podcast and a big advocate. You're always, reposting, sending nice messages and sending me personal messages about the interviews and enjoying it on your travels. So it's really good to have you here. Thanks so much.
No, it's a pleasure. As you say, it's been a long time coming. Our schedules haven't quite worked out that well, but we got here before I got my Fox book, so it's something.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a backstory also about communicating with Marcus. He's, as all wildlife photographers need a lot of patience, he's been incredibly patient. It's now May 11th, and he still hasn't received his book a year after backing our Kickstarter. And well, I can only really blame Brexit. I mean, I've had 2 books sent back from Portugal, and we've now sent one to his sister in Sweden, who does remain in the EU, and we'll be sending them direct to Marcus. So fingers crossed you're going to get that soon.
Yeah, but I mean, in fairness, I think, Brexit, yes, but also Portuguese customs, not quite as efficient as Swedish ones. So yeah, I think Sweden's going to be a safer bet. At least I'll get a message from customs saying, hey, there's something here, you need to pay for it, which I never did in Portugal. So...
But actually, yeah, tell us about living in Portugal. So you're originally from Sweden, of course. When did you move there? Why did you move there? How's life there?
Well, life is good. Live in the countryside. I bought a place in November, homeowner for the first time. So I feel like I'm getting lots of grown-up points before I turn 40. Better late than never, that as well. We're really happy. So I left Sweden when I was 10. I moved around with my family. I lived in a dozen different places around the world, and for many years didn't really live anywhere. When I started out with photography, it was a good way to save money. It was just to be on the road all the time. So we've been here for a couple of years now. My parents have lived in Portugal for the last 6 or 7 years, so we kind of got stuck here during the beginning of the pandemic when TAP decided to cancel all flights without telling any of their customers the day before we were due to head back to Sweden. And by the time we left, we'd bought a piece of land, and then, everything's gone a bit nuts with prices and stuff. So we couldn't afford to build and sold the land, found a house an hour away from Lisbon. And we're super happy here. I love just going for walks or working in the garden or just sitting outside, listening to the birds. I don't know what most of the birds are. It's a kind of, I love birds, but it's the same when I'm photographing them. It's like, oh, that one's pretty. I'll photograph that, but I don't necessarily know what it is I'm photographing, and that's fine.
Idea later. Oh, that's great. Yeah, it sounds like I know this idea that you should be a homeowner by the time you're 40, and you've got dogs and you're married, but you're also still a very active traveling photographer, which is also one of the reasons why it's been difficult to tie you down for an interview. But yeah, tell us a bit about like what you've been up to recently. We can go back and talk a bit more about your history, but I always like to start off and find out what you've been working on recently, what you're about to go and work on. Because one of the things, when you sent me your bunch of material is going through you shoot a hell of a lot of stories and a hell of a variety of different stories. And yeah, this really seems to be your niche and certainly your passion. And yeah, can you just talk a bit about that and also tell a little bit about what you're up to recently?
Sure. Well, not sure where to start exactly, but recent. Okay. So the last assignment I had was in South Sudan, African Parks, which is a big conservation nonprofit organization based out of Johannesburg. They can co-manage protected areas in a number of countries in Africa, and I suppose I'm kind of their main photographer. I mean, there's a number of photographers who work for them, but usually if there's a job like this, that's a new park for them, and there's a lot of things that need to be documented, a wide variety of things that need to be documented, and particularly if it's a little bit tricky logistically. I don't tend to go to, Zambia and Malawi for them. It's usually like Chad and Benin and the Congos and, South Sudan now, which was amazing. I mean, yes, I'm absolutely blown away, which does not happen often. I'm a pretty level-headed person, but the first flight into the two parks that they're now active in was just mind-blowing. You hear rumors about South Sudan, right? That they have a big migration, there's a lot of wildlife. No, you have no idea. I mean, no one had any idea. That's just because of the civil wars and because there's zero infrastructure. There's an area the size of England that it's not untouched, but it's intact, right?
Wow.
There are just millions and millions of antelope. There's aerial surveys going on right now, and very, very likely they're going to, demote the Serengeti migration to number 2. I don't think there's much chance that it's not going to. I mean, it's just
wow. Yeah, I had no idea. This is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah, even when I got when they told me that I was going there so primarily to photograph a coloring operation, but then also to because I hadn't had a photographer there before, to shoot as much as I could of other stuff around that. And because I've been so busy with, being in the field and other assignments, I hadn't really looked at the details of even what we were coloring. I'd been told it was going to be antelope. And, then I got the list and it was like, a dozen different species and a whole bunch of, there's over 100 animals that were given tracking colors in the end. And yeah, it was just, flying over these mega herds of Tiang antelope, and this is tens of thousands of them in the same herd. And the white-eared cob, you always hear that, there's probably hundreds of thousands of them. No, there's millions of them. I mean, it's just crazy. And they didn't know that there were still cheetah and lions and, well, there they are. And now they've been collared as well, and finding herds of buffalo that everyone thought had been gone for a long time, and healthy breeding herds of giraffes, and it was incredible. So it's going to be a really interesting project to follow.
That's amazing. And with this work, I mean, obviously you have, I imagine, a contacts list of magazines and places you want to get these stories out, and I can imagine these kind of stories are very exciting to an audience reading about new conservation projects or new places where there are large concentrations of wildlife. But with also you're just going out there and shooting a ton of fresh stuff, is there also the potential with this work to go up to a policy level to create protected areas? Is that also part of your mission working with these NGOs?
I think for the reason that to go back a little bit, because I think it helps explain it. So after an earlier stint in my life of sports science and working as a personal trainer and doing all kinds of other stuff, I studied conservation in Tasmania in Australia, and then I moved to Kenya to do my kind of thesis research work. And while I was there, I reached out to a bunch of different NGOs to see if there was anything I could do to help. And I just kind of picked up photography as a serious hobby. I had delusional ideas of, how good I was. And I mean, I really wasn't at the time. And I'm not just saying that, like I've gone back and looked at my early photos. And,
of course.
But luckily, sometimes you need to have a little bit of delusion in order to push yourself and to give something a try. But anyway, so, as I was doing that, and everything went well with the research and the thesis and all the rest of it, but I also realized that there's already a lot of people working on the ground, right? Like lack of willing helping hands is not the issue. And B, no one is going to read my research because it's just not the kind of thing that people read, no matter how relevant it is, unless it's translated into a form and published in a place that, your average normal person would be looking at. And because I'd fallen in love with photography and I wanted to see more of the content as well, I thought, well, maybe I should think about it a bit differently and see if I can just document what other people are doing and, help communicate that to a wider audience. And that's how I started.
How far back are we going?
So I lived in Kenya 2011, and then 2012 I drove around. I drove from Kenya down to South Africa and back up again, and kind of going from project to project, building up a portfolio, and
great.
Stressing out about my car breaking down constantly. And then doing that for publications is one thing, but over time, like more and more, what I realized that I wanted to do was work directly for the organizations, because it's fantastic, obviously, being able to publish images in magazines and newspapers, and that might be able to help change things, and it might not, as you say. I mean, but there's an uncertainty about it, right? Like you don't know. It's hard to follow up on what's happening. But the one thing you can be pretty sure of is that these NGOs, like, they know what they need. They already obviously have the contacts to get things going on a policy level. But what they often lack is compelling visual material. And so when I go and do these jobs, I mean, and now it hasn't always been the sort of the majority of my work and my income. I do a lot of travel writing and photography as well. And it's actually been really helpful in terms of development, because it was what taught me that photographing wildlife just wasn't going to be enough. For the first stories, they were like, yeah, but where's all your photos of people and of things happening and of this and that? And, so it has been great. But now this is, most of what I do. And I really enjoy it. And it also means that I don't have to try to figure out myself how I'm going to use these photos to implement change somewhere, because there are other people who are just waiting for the photos in order to use them to do that. And that takes a bit of pressure off. And it lets me focus on what I know that I do best. And, I let them do what they do best, basically.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast. And I think more and more as I develop my own photography as well, is that you're just one piece of the jigsaw, and actually, sticking to what you're good at is really good. And it's great that you've got and have developed the writing side of your photography as well, because I bet people love that if you can go in with a whole package of written content and photo content. But I think it's really good to recognize that, that you're not a politician, or, you're not an influencer or have those kind of contacts at high level government that make all of these decisions. Leave it to the other people, but do your part of the job the best you can. And
there's also a limited number of hours in a day. I mean, you have to find a balance, and you have to choose how to spend your time. And if you try to do everything, I mean, even with the writing, like I have a good friend in London who's a much better writer than I am. I'm fine, like I'm competent, but he's a wordsmith. And so part of the reason that I do work with him sometimes is just because of his skill, but part of it is just the writing takes a lot of time. And I'm always falling behind on writing commitments anyways. It's, what I love about the photography is that, of course, like you have work to do on it when you get back home as well. But I mean, I actually do a lot of my processing in the field in the evenings or during lunch, as long as there's electricity. But even so, like the main part of your work is done by the time you come home, whereas the writing, often hasn't even started.
Yeah, sure.
And I find like I need to be more in a certain headspace to do the writing than to process photos or keywording or whatever you need to do with.
And actually, on that, it's interesting to hear. I love hearing about how different photographers work, and you're talking about processing in the field, and that really takes pressure off when you get back home, that you're not doing it all in one big go. But can you talk a bit more about like how you approach a story now, or also how that's kind of evolved over the years from the method? Do you have a shot list, for example? Do you work closely with someone, who from an NGO who wants particular images, and then having to adapt, of course, because there's so much unpredictability especially when you're dealing with animals. And then, also maintaining this authenticity. And, these are kind of things that I would imagine that you kind of have to go through, but it'd be interesting to hear about how you approach a shoot, or like the next one you're going on, for example.
Well, I guess a lot of it over time becomes almost second nature, right? So you don't necessarily think about it that much. With new clients, it depends. I mean, some of them don't necessarily know exactly what they want, so we talk more about the messaging that they're interested in, and then we just go out and we see what comes of it. With like African parks, for example, sometimes there's a long shot list and sometimes it's very short, but again, it's most of it, when you've done enough of these assignments, it's kind of common sense. So the more important thing that we would talk about is if there are specific shots, like a small number, like, well, this is going to be the main messaging that we want to get out of this, and then after that, it's pretty much free hands. I'm very productive, I guess, like as a photographer. I think one of the things that's happened as a result of this, or if it's the other way around, that was always my approach, and that's why I just happen to happens to work quite well for me to do these kinds of assignments, is that, I really enjoy variety. I don't mind. I have fun shooting workshops and, car repairs when I'm on an assignment, just as I enjoy being in villages or being on patrol with rangers or doing aerials or whatever it is, like, everything's kind of approached the same way. And I always focus much more on, I guess, like raising my lower bar quite high, as opposed to trying to get a few killer shots. I could probably count on the, on the fingers of one hand, the number of shots that I have that I'd actually put any real planning into. Most of them are just, you end up in a situation and this is what's happening. Okay, maybe you can ask like, that guy, can you take a couple of steps to your left, please? But that's usually about it. It's partly because of the unpredictable nature of it, and partly because I'm just in the field so much. And every time, like every couple of weeks, it's a completely new assignment. And if I come home from a job with like African parks, I would expect to be able to give them, between 500 and 700 strong shots from being in the field for 8 or 10 days. And that means I can't spend, so like a huge amount of time trying to set up like a single shot, because it's just not, for them, that's just not going to be the priority. Like they need strong shots of a really wide range of subjects and topics and objects and people and all the rest of it. It's just not, whether I get a competition winning shot from one of them, like, yeah, it's great, but it's not going to be a priority for them. And therefore it can't be for me either, because that's not what I'm hired to do.
And then, one of the questions that comes up a lot is, how you now make this pay. We all know that budgets for newspapers, magazine articles, commissions for me certainly are a thing of the past in stills photography, my goodness. But, obviously it's an expensive business, flying around, camera equipment, software, hard drives. How do you make it pay?
I don't know. I guess in a way it's an easier question to answer than what does a typical year look like for you, because everything changes so much from year to year. So, in the past, media used to be a bigger, it wasn't a bigger earner in total. It was just a bigger percentage of what I earned. But I had, that's why I didn't have anywhere to live for a long time. Like it was just easier to be on the road. With that, I have a couple of advantages, I guess. Like one is that I'm fully bilingual in terms of writing as well, right? And so being from Sweden, Sweden is a much smaller pond, but that also makes me a somewhat, relatively bigger fish. And because I write and photograph, it's not actually that common, right? So like working for Scandinavia's biggest travel magazine, I guess I've written and photographed over 30 features for them over the last like 8 or 10 years. And that's been a really useful thing to be able to do. And that's at, to the point where for the last few years, I basically just get in touch with them and say, hey, I'm going to go to Tajikistan on an assignment. Like, do you want an article? And that's the extent of my pitch. And they'll be like either yes or no. Sorry, we've done one just now. These days, it is much more working for NGOs and other clients of that nature, like conservation projects and things. And because, as you say, like what you get paid by magazines and publications now, like it's a handy extra income, but it's not going to pay very many bills. So in the beginning of my career, like, so when I first started out, when I was living in Kenya and decided to give this a go, I was very pragmatic about it. And so I had a bit of a plan. I was like, right, well, I've been working, and I had a student loan that I've been taking as big as I could while I was at university. So I had some savings. And I figured that, all right, well, if I'm on the road and if I barter a lot, like I can make this last, right? So within 3 years, I need to be not losing money on this. And if within 5 years I'm not earning money, then that's like, okay, in 5 years I can still go back and do a PhD probably. After that, I'm pretty sure my academic career is over, and I'm running out of options. And so in the beginning, that everything was about trying to cut down on costs, not earning money. And I guess that allowed me over time to build up a little bit of a reputation and a portfolio. And then I was lucky, like this travel magazine, the editor-in-chief at the time, he loved Africa, and I was blogging for Africa Geographic, I think, and he'd seen some of my photos and asked, could you write an article for us? That's when I had that conversation about, well, where's all the photos of everything except for landscapes and wildlife. And I wrote an article for them on Namibia, and he was like, this is good. We run travel writing courses. Like, tell you what, we'll treat you to one. Like, why don't you come? And I did, and I took notes of how they felt like a travel story should be written, and then I wrote like that, and that was that. So the having that as one part of what I do has been really useful, and then just being smart about not spending money until I have it. Which is why we didn't get a house until now, when I felt like, I'm pretty sure I have enough jobs to actually pay for this. Plus, Portugal is a lot cheaper than many other places in Europe.
Yeah, there does seem to be a good, I've heard about these, what they call like digital nomad visas that Portugal are
not
giving
that
out.
You need it if you're an EU citizen, but
of course, yeah.
So for us moving here, it was quite easy.
Yeah, Marcus has a smug smile on his face right now because he knows that's not my case anymore.
No.
I'm trying to get it. My dad is half Italian, so we're working on Italian citizenship right now.
All right. Well, best of luck. But yeah, I mean, look, with trying to earn from this, I mean, as you say, it's not easy, and it's not just not easy because there's less money. I know that one of the times that we were in touch as well, when a mutual friend of ours was on your podcast and said something about like how wonderful it is to, you should earn your money doing this, and then you can help, do free work for conservation NGOs. And I was like, I'm going to have something to say about that, because for those of us who actually make a living doing this, but it's hard, right? Because with all of these things, like, it's fully understandable why people give their photos for free to publications if they're in the beginning of their career, because how else are you going to get published, right? And to NGOs, because it's nice, like you're giving someone a helping hand, and they probably don't have much of a budget. But there's always a flip side to that, and the flip side is the more people give their stuff for free to anyone, the less likely that anyone's going to get paid for it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I feel really, really strongly about that, and it does seem to be that photography of the arts, and I don't know what it is. My guess is that because particularly now everyone is a photographer on their smartphones, and they can make pictures look cool. They actually can be very good iPhone photographers or smartphone photographers, whatever. That the value of it is just decreased. Not everyone can go and paint, a very high quality painting immediately, but people can go and get half decent or potentially commercial or saleable looking images very easily. So it sort of devalues in a way what we do. And also, since the digital revolution, all the stock agencies were just saturated. Okay, not with the best quality, but they were able to, that basically brought the price right down, very much like similar thing happened with the music industry. So yeah, I think I completely agree with you. We shouldn't give our work away for free because, we have mortgages to pay like everybody else. And NGOs do have budgets. People are paid to work for NGOs. So it shouldn't be that it's expected. And I agree with you. There are cases when, okay, if you're helping out an NGO that really does have no budget and you believe in the good cause, but there does have to be some self-respect and also a mindset where you're doing, this is work and it takes a long time, as you've already talked about, very succinctly, about developing your craft, and therefore that needs to be remunerated properly.
But I guess that's part of the thing, though, that for a lot of people it isn't work. It's also, it could easily be an opportunity to go somewhere that they've always wanted to go to and not have to pay for it. And it's hard to argue with that, because they also know that if they say no to that and say like, well, actually you need to pay me, then most likely they're going to pay someone like me to do it instead. Or if this was me 10 years ago, they would have paid, I don't know, like Brent Sturton to do it, or you know what I mean? Like, it's just, so you can fully understand why these situations exist. But I think for me, the biggest issue isn't so much for us, that it creates a struggle for us. It's that in the end, what's going to happen, or will continue to happen, is it'll basically kill, the profession. And that means that all you will have are these people who are able and willing to do it for a week or two a year as a one-off for free, because like, I'd really like to go there. And yes, like, of course there are some great photographers doing that, but it's not the same thing as doing that kind of photography professionally and regularly. And I mean, there is a reason why, I guess, like, photographers like me and others doing similar things, why NGOs are willing to pay to bring us in to do that. But it only works, each NGO might get you 1 or 2 jobs a year. So that's not enough to stay professional. So you're reliant on there being enough organizations or enough clients to actually be willing to pay for this thing in order to make it go around. And I think that is, the issue like that is what might disappear more and more if NGOs and whoever else, like companies, if they become too reliant on being able to basically use free labor because they can offer like a cool experience. And so part of the conversation I have with some of my clients, even if I know that, okay, I'm being paid reasonably well, but I know that not everyone that they use might be. And I'm not happy to leave it just because I'm now being paid. And, there was a time when they weren't willing to pay me. I kind of feel like it's our responsibility to try to, implement these changes across the board, even if we're now in the driver's seat to some extent, or if we're fairly safe.
Yeah, I think that's like to be a mouthpiece for younger photographers, or even just photographers who want to get paid properly for doing their work, that don't have your experience or your established way of working. I think one of the big issues is there isn't really kind of an industry in our world, or somewhere where there's a template, or we're not unionized in any way, so that it's almost like a battle. And I've had many battles over the years. I mean, I don't work for free at all, and haven't done for a number of years, because I think what happens is you end up just respecting yourself more, and also because of the realities of having to pay bills and bringing up a daughter, and time is so limited. But it's like trying to get that message across, not only to younger photographers, but also to the people that have the potential to pay these people, even if it's a small amount of money. One of the things that you said is just about being paid, fairly and reasonably. This is not like some huge commercial big project that you're doing. This is something that's, you just want to be fairly paid. And in order to do that, and in order to get that work, you are not just a photographer, you are a writer, but you are also a relationship builder, and building those relationships with people that they can end up trusting you. And I think for someone who's hiring a photographer, they want some form of predictability, that they can know that you're going to deliver. And that's more than just being a photographer. That's being an all-round, good person who's going to do, you're going to do a good job. And yeah, I think there's a value in that it's over and above just, buying and selling images in a transactional way.
For sure, and look, I think there's about 5 different directions we could go from what you just said there, and as a very short kind of aside to that, and what people get paid, right? So I remember being contacted by a photographer who was just kind of starting out in Sweden, doing weddings, asking if I thought it was reasonable that she was being offered like £2,000 a day for her wedding shoots. Or if that was too low. I was just like, well, I really don't know what to say. Like if I had a client who offered me that to do the kind of work that I do, even though their budgets are, and sure, like this is just the way the market works, right? Like, people's weddings are important to them, and big companies that want to do commercials, they can also afford to pay. But that's the thing, like it's not like most of the big NGOs can't afford to pay. It's just that it hasn't been a priority to put aside money for a photography budget because they don't need to. And as you were saying, that there's no industry as such, like there's no united front, and that means it's very easy to undercut. It's easy for us to play a part in that, but it's also very easy for the people potentially hiring us to do it, right? So, I mean, there was another, I'm not going to say which organization, but I've been in conversation about doing a really exciting job in a part of Africa that I really like. But it needs to go to a tender, right? Because the job is too big to, even though they want to work with me, it's like, yeah, but this is just the way we have to do it. And Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, so that's your day rate? Oh, well, just so you know, like this other guy that we worked with, like he only charged half that much. So, we'd like to pay you, but chances are you're not going to get it if that's what you're asking for. And it's like, well, sorry, but I just can't. There are some compromises I'm willing to make if the job is interesting enough. But in this case, and a really lovely guy that I've been talking to, and he was completely honest. He's like, it's not that we don't have the money. It's just that this is what the other people are charging. And therefore, it's going to be hard for me to argue that we should hire you, even if we want to.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I suppose that shows where their values are. It's less about, I mean, these other people could be, doing a perfectly good job, and maybe no one would ever notice, who was looking at those images, whether they were a Marcus Westberg.
Of course. But the thing is, like, the question is whether they are only charging as little as they are because it's a tender as well. So in South Sudan now as well, I was there with there's a bunch of veterinarians, of course. And it's a similar situation for them. In some cases, they get offered jobs, but sometimes they are being asked to basically, like, it's a tender, and they have to make an offer of what they're willing to work for. And of course, like that, and yeah, sure, like that's how the world works. But there's something a little bit, it's not sinister, but it's just, again, if you know that the money is actually there to pay, and we're not asking for a fortune, like you are basically earning anyway, like a third or a quarter of apparently what like a beginner wedding photographer is able to charge, right? So it's not like we're talking about a huge amount of money, or that it's unreasonable in any way. And I guess like that's what a lot of, this is not, I don't want to make it sound like I'm a photographer activist in that sense, but yeah, I think those conversations are important to have with people in the industry that, sure, like I might be paid now what I'm being asked to pay, but these other guys, like it should never be a question of offering them, basically like enough money to buy a cup of coffee. And then the rest of it, even if they're more than willing to do the jobs for that, like just pay them a little bit better anyway, so that we set a standard across the board of making it not easier for people, but just less likely that you feel pressured into lowering your salary or doing jobs for free just because, well, it's either that or I'm not going to be able to do anything. And that's not really a nice situation to be in.
And I don't know about you, but I've never been able to pay my mortgage through exposure.
No. There's a whole bunch of things that you can't pay with exposure. In fact, funny how that works.
The other thing about exposure, and of course I did it when I was younger. Oh yeah, it'll be good for exposure, or we'll give you a credit, all of that kind of stuff. Is that I don't even think I ever got any work off the back of it either.
No.
So it just doesn't. It doesn't work like that. So anyone listening to this, who's been offered, exposure in return for images, forget it. Get money.
Yeah, no,
money's more important.
Absolutely. I think, I don't know, like publications, same thing really as like competitions and stuff, right? Like, yeah, you might get a lucky break from something, someone saw this one story or went to this exhibition or whatever it might be. But in the end, like what those things I think are more valuable for is once you build up enough of them, then it says something about your staying power, I guess, like that this is someone who maybe needs to be taken seriously because they've clearly been around for a long time and been published not once or twice, one image for a credit, but actually, on a regular basis. I mean, ironically, and, as someone who in many ways is not really a fan of what social media is, doing to our society, I've actually gotten a couple of jobs from my captions on Instagram and like long lasting jobs too, like either writing jobs, but also just, like regular photography clients who just kind of liked what that said about, a little bit like we were talking about, right? So I guess that's the main thing that I wanted to come back to is when you're talking about being more than a photographer. And I don't mean being a writer, but in terms of being like a good human being, that really should be at the core of all of this. And I always feel like it's a little bit tacky when I get asked for, advice for like, what advice would you give to a budding photographer? And I'm just like, be nice. And it sounds, it sounds like a platitude, but it's not. Like it really isn't, because at the end of the day, with a few exceptions, I think, most people would rather hire someone who is like a good photographer and a nice human being than someone who's fantastic but is a bit of a dick.
Yeah,
it's just like there are exceptions, obviously, and there always will be. But to be honest, like I would rather be hired because someone thinks, yeah, no, he's a good photographer and he's nice to work with, than like, yeah, he's fantastic, so we'll just put up with his personality, just to get the images.
Yeah, exactly. That certainly would leave a sour taste in my mouth for sure. And I think it also goes back to what I was saying about you. It's funny because it's in many ways it's such a solitary business. You are on your own, you're generating work on your own, but actually when you're doing work, it's a team effort. And whether that's publishing a book or writing an article or giving images to NGOs, you're working with other people. And so you have to have those attributes and those skills as a person to to want to do it. And also ultimately, and this is something that I really like about you, and also writing, the writing that you did for your bio, I thought was really lovely and unusual. So I suggest everyone just check out Marcus's website and read his bio, is that you have this humbleness about you and this kind of feeling uncomfortable about, you don't want to be the hero with the camera, even though our work can sometimes look like that. You're much more interested about what your work can do and can it affect change? Can you have a positive impact rather than, hey, I'm Marcus Westberg, the hero white guy in Africa with all the camera gear.
Yeah, I mean, and I again, I even feel awkward, like, I even felt awkward writing that, because I thought, well, I don't want people to think that I'm just saying this, because it's not. I mean, I have no problem being in the center of attention. I don't like to be the one to direct the spotlight to me, if that makes sense. I'm quite happy. I don't mind, like, I enjoy doing interviews and things like that, but I'm also quite happy just going about my business. And I mean, we might talk a bit more about that. I'm not sure, but like one of the things I've been doing for the last few years is, covering unsustainable forestry in Sweden. And there have been some very tangible results, and there's been quite a lot of attention, for me from it. But some of the most meaningful feedback I've had has been from people saying that, look, your photos are what we bring out in meetings with like members of the European Parliament to counter the arguments from the industry and the lobby. And no one is ever going to know that. Like, no one's ever going to see that. Like, this is behind closed doors. But that's fine. Like, if that's how they're best used, then that's great. Like, and
that's brilliant. That's really good. And actually, I did want to ask you about that, because I saw that actually through Staffan last year, that you had this big feature published in the Guardian, and I think we're we've been fed information. I mean, I remember at school being fed information about the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. And of course, that's continued throughout my whole life. And people that are a lot older than me as well. But we don't often hear about it in Europe.
No, because we spend a lot of money on PR campaigns and lobbying the right people. So Staffan and I we have a mutual friend in Sweden who used to work for one of the state-owned forestry company in Sweden, and he's been quite open after he retired. I mean, so he's a big opponent now of clear cutting. And I'll give a little bit of background to what's happening in Sweden, but just to start off here, and he's told us that they're very open about modeling themselves on big tobacco and big oil in terms of how you play the public and politicians, basically. So it's not a coincidence that I didn't even know about what was going on until the pandemic, pretty much, because I just I think there's also a sense. There's a tendency for most of us to want to believe that we're doing the right thing, right? Like we want to believe that recycling is amazing, and maybe sometimes it is, maybe sometimes it's a scam, right? Like I'm not saying that it's one or the other, but until somebody forces us to see that something isn't true, we don't, we're quite happy just going along with it because I want to think that I'm doing the right thing, and if I know that it's not working, then I need to put in a lot more effort to figure out what to do instead. So if I can just go on believing that I'm doing my bit, like that's great, and maybe that's part of it. But So I mean, Sweden, green, sustainable Sweden is clear cutting its natural forest and has been doing for 70 years now. So we have a very small amount of it left. Not good for the climate, not good for biodiversity, not good for anything else. But we have a strong forestry industry and politicians who either have been bought or just have bought the story, and so we just keep being told that everything's fantastic. This is the answer to everything. It's the answer to climate change. It's the most sustainable forestry industry in the world. I mean, it's complete nonsense. Like it's like could not be.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at you just have to look at 3 or 4 of these images in this story, and it's shocking. I mean, it is. It could be, if it was different looking trees, it could be right out of the Amazon.
I mean, look, we clear cut a bigger percentage of our what would be defined as like forest land than Brazil does every year. Like it's obviously a smaller area because we're a much smaller country, but it's a significantly, it's like 50% higher, the percentage that we log, and something like 97% of the logging in Sweden is clear cutting.
Wow.
But you leave 3 trees and then you can't call it clear cutting because it doesn't meet the definition that funny coincidence they came up with. So it's like you can't call it plowing because they lift the plow like every meter or so for like a couple of centimeters, and therefore it has a different like technical term that no one knows what it's called. It's like no layperson would know what it means, right? Because it's called like land treatment or something. So it doesn't sound so bad.
And then these things are written into law by the same people who have shareholdings in these companies.
No, absolutely. I mean, so there was we've had a couple of really big like research projects into forestry, like in Sweden, and funnily enough, like it turned out once somebody started digging into this, that the 2 people like running both of these research projects, like one of them got hired by one of the big forestry companies, and the other one was already like on the board of one of them. It's just, and then as soon as so there was a really fantastic investigative journalist in Sweden who's done dozens of articles on this over the last couple of years. And once she started digging into it, then scientists were coming out as well, saying that they were basically bullied into, like, this is what we need to find. And so this is the line, like, clear cutting is good. Like, so anything you find that supports that, like, great. Anything else, like, not interested.
Yeah. I know. I mean, it's like here, obviously, the fox hunting story is quite close to my heart. There was an article that came out this week in the Daily Telegraph, apparently saying, vets have now said that the government needs to urgently commission a scientific review because since the ban in 2004, fox numbers have plummeted. So since the hunting ban, fox numbers have plummeted, which, I mean, we could go off for, hours on this. But one of the things that's hilarious about that is since the ban, fox hunters have just carried on as normal.
Yeah.
So if they're using that as an argument, it just makes no sense anyway. So yeah, when you get to the higher level, and we already talked about nefarious activity, whether it's hunting animals or forestry, it's it's a big problem. But it's great that you're going in and doing this stuff in your home nation as well, and getting the access and getting compelling images that are and I suppose it's hard to quantify. You said this earlier about getting an image in a newspaper or a magazine, but the best thing you can do is get it in to those kind of places with the biggest outreach, and hope that the exposing does make a difference.
Yeah, and in some ways, even though this started out as a personal project, I guess probably like the only personal photography project I've ever done. Even then, I was fairly clear on it from the beginning. Like, well, I didn't want to lose money on it. So when so basically the pandemic hit. We'd been in Portugal for a few months and then got back home once flights opened up again. I'd only just learned about this, right? Because my wife is German, and she'd never seen the Northern Lights, and so the winter before the pandemic hit, we'd gone up for a couple of weeks. We were based in Stockholm at the time, so that she could see the aurora. Didn't have a huge amount of luck because it was just like overcast constantly and no activity.
No.
Oh, we did see it like briefly one night, so she was very happy. She was like squealing in the car. But what I did do though is I spent one night staying at a guest house in the far north, where the owner is very, very concerned about this type of forestry because it's so rampant up north. There's fewer people living there, and therefore you get away with more basically. And so going out with him on a snowmobile tour like that was what opened up my eyes to what was happening. And so anyway, I came back in the summer, and then in the fall I actually tried a bit of fox photography. We don't really have, like, where I live, like, there's no urban foxes, so they were so shy. I spent so many nights like lying in like a little tent thing. And
Andy and Neil always would tease me about that, because especially Andy doing rural foxes, they're the same. It's so shy, so hard to get close to. And of course, I walk up the road 10 minutes from here, and they're just everywhere.
Yeah. And then so I did that. I went around to a couple of national parks and saw some nice things, but then I don't know. I just started thinking that, look, Sweden does not have a shortage of brilliant nature photographers, and everyone goes to the same places, and the national parks and your beautiful mountains and forests and nice wildlife. Like, I'm not gonna get better material than they have anyway, because I'm only here for a few months, and it's not really gonna do anything. But for whatever reason, like, nobody seemed to have systematically just documented, but in a like professional, aesthetically compelling way, like the clear cutting. And so I started doing that. I reached out to an NGO and just asked if they could provide me with money for a rental car and fuel. Because, remember it was like beginning of the pandemic, like a little bit slight panic about like what the hell's going to happen to
Of course.
So I was like, I was fine. Like, I wasn't desperate. I didn't need to earn right then. But I couldn't afford to spend money on that either. I went around for a bit. Access is not really an issue because it's everywhere. Like, once you know what you're looking for, I would, like, later on, people would get in touch with me with tips, right? Like, oh, you should go and check out this place. Like, half of them turned out to be not great for documenting anyway, or they were 20 years old, or, it just like the map pin just didn't work out. Some of them worked, but for the most part, it was just like, you don't need to know. Just look on like Google Earth, and then just go driving in that general area, and you'll find so much, like, wherever you are.
So that's the thing. It's not even being disguised by, leaving a layer of thin trees by the roadside and behind.
Because that's the thing, right? So so there's been, there are rules about how old trees have to be before you can cut them, like even in plantations. And at least it used to be something like 80 to 100 years. They may be lowering it now. And the systematic like clear cutting started in the 50s. So, you do the math, right? Most of when they cut down and then replant, those trees aren't old enough to cut down yet. So you just constantly have to be taking down whatever natural forest is around, which is why we have so little of it left now. And yeah, in the beginning, I'm sure they were doing it more discreetly and, away from the highways and stuff, but there's not that much left to choose from. So you just do it wherever it is. And so these days, even some of the most upsetting photos, I guess, that I have, they've just been taken like literally right next to the highways.
Wow.
You just pull over,
it's not even like you had to
put the drone up and then,
Yeah. It's not even like you had to look over your shoulder or you felt like you were an investigative journalist.
So, I mean, with ongoing cutting, like it's a bit different. Not because I think there would actually be any issues, but because I'm just like, I don't like confrontation. I don't like making other people feel uncomfortable. Like I don't like being mean, like that's why I hate social media. It's like, it's great for some things, but I would never, I hope I never write like in an aggressive manner. You don't know what people's backstories are, right? Like the guys who are actually out there doing this stuff, it's not like they're like, oh, I hate forests. Like I'm going to, destroy what I can. It's just, people get upset. So I did for the most part, try to work in places where there was no one else, but it's surprisingly hard to find ongoing operations anyway, because they don't have to announce them until minimum of 6 weeks before they start. But Sweden's a big country and this stuff is going on everywhere. So unless you just get lucky, and I mean, as has happened, in one case, like where a bunch of my photos are from, the neighbor is someone who I was in touch, or he got in touch with me and he's like, hey, they're, just starting to cut down this like old growth forest, like literally 20 meters from my house. Do you have, and I happened to be around, so I could come over and snuck around in the trees, thinking I was being really discreet, like at night, getting all these shots. And then, of course, like it turned out that the guy had seen us from the beginning, and he was just a bit concerned that we would get hurt by the machine. But he was perfectly nice. It was fine. So, a lot of stress for nothing. As it turned out.
And actually, I think what you say, and you've said this already, is this things should be more nuanced, and in social media, it's it's black or white, and you often see so and so got owned by this, or so and so got taken down, and actually the guys that are there running these machines cutting down trees, they're not like the guilty party. Like they've got certain skill set, they got bills to pay like everybody else. And this is interesting talking to Charlie Hamilton James about all of the stuff in the Amazon as well, is that like we like the good guys, bad guys narrative.
Yeah.
But it's always much more nuanced than that. And with your story on the deforestation in Sweden, great exposure through The Guardian. I don't know where else you got it published, but also really great that that your images are being used in some decision making or policy level.
I mean, so actually, by the time this, so I mean, it's been published all over, but usually it's just a few photos. A journalist will get in touch and be like, "Hey, we're covering this for like Le Monde or New York Times or whatever, and we need photos to illustrate it." But in a couple of days, so Sweden is, they're hosting the presidency of the EU for these 6 months, and the EU is basically our biggest hope, because the legislation that they want to bring through is much, much stricter in terms of what's sustainable in forestry than what Sweden thinks, and in Finland as well. And there's a meeting now, like an EU conference for forestry, basically, in a couple of days in Sweden. And so one of the NGOs is doing an outdoor exhibition with 30 of my clear cutting shots there.
Yeah, that's
great. Which will be nice.
And that's what I was curious about, was the lifespan of a story like this. Can you walk away from that project? I don't know if you're still developing it, but say you have finished, can you walk away feeling like, my job's done? And you obviously, photographers like to move on to new projects anyway, but do you have any say, or do you continue to push older stories that you've shot?
It really depends on what I'm doing. It is very rare that I see something primarily as a story. And so in this case, for example, if we're talking about the forestry, which is, very different from everything else I do, like the other stuff that I do is almost always on an assignment for someone. I don't tend to go out and just do things on my own that much. I'm playing around a little bit now with like bullfighting and things, just working, just being in touch with Joanne to see what I can do there. But other than that, like it's always assignment based, and so it's very clear. Like I go there, I'm there for 2 weeks, and then I come back. The forestry stuff is different, but that too is not primarily as a story. Like getting stories published about it has been great, obviously, and we need to get it out there in international news. But that's not really it's not really the driving force behind it. So once I'd done that first trip, a lot of it's been about collaborating with sometimes getting financing from different conservation organizations in Sweden, and it's not really a project that has like a start and a finish point. It's not like, well, now I've got what I need, because it's not really about what I need. If they say that, hey, we'd love to get more shots of this, from this part of Sweden, or there's something happening now, can we work on this? Then the project is ongoing. And so I might not know at any given time if I'm kind of finished with the photography for it, or if I'm not. And I mean, I would say in this case that I am not, and I have some ideas of things I would like to try that are a little bit different. Whether that turns into anything, I don't know. So at the same time, I'll just keep doing what I have been doing, because I know that that's what they can use, right? So this exhibition that I mentioned, now there's potentially a much bigger one in a more Central European setting a bit later, that we're working on. Those things are great, but as long as these guys, think that they have, use for these images in their own campaigns, then I'm happy to keep doing the work. But when I started out, like one of the goals I had was basically just to inspire other people to do the same. And the more that happens, obviously, the less important, I guess, like my role in this becomes, right? So I had a really nice chat with the president of like I guess kind of like the Swedish version of the ILCP, right? Like the Nature Photographers Association of Sweden or something. And, so she was talking about them now wanting to start a big project on this. And she said that she felt like nature photographers in Sweden do bear some of the blame for what's happened, because they've known about this, but they've all just avoided it, to go to the beautiful forest and take photos there. And that's basically helped spread the image of how wonderful everything is in Sweden, that the industry has been trying to spread and that the government's been trying to spread. And she said that, the what's been happening in the last couple of years and my images have helped her rethink that. And she's now doing more of this. And obviously it'd be amazing, like, okay, not great necessarily for the money that I can earn doing this stuff, but it's fantastic if we get another 20 professional photographers who go out and document this stuff, because this is about a lot more than this being my project, right? Like the more we can do, the better, and then I move on to something else.
Yeah, I can see that you're the type of guy that you can put your ego to one side, and again, we talked about it earlier, looking at the greater good, and ultimately that seems to be what I don't know if you call it your mission, but what a lot of your work is about. And if it means that the story about this, which is basically good journalism, because you want to, we're all desperate for truth in the social media age. That your images can do that and affect a real positive change and get other people to get involved and get active with it. And I think that's where photography is really powerful, and that we can have that kind of impact purely by having a powerful visual, of course, with sound science, with good writing, and with good people, whether that's news outlets or whether that's NGOs or government people.
And I think just sometimes giving people hope that someone is watching. I mean, that's another thing. I think, even if you have someone else who has the same talent and can take more or less the same photos, those of us who've been around for a bit longer, we have contacts. So even though Staffan, for example, he hasn't been documenting clear cutting, but we've still been kind of working together on a lot of this, because he's been around for 20, 30 years longer than me, and has a different kind of network. And we can reach out to the New York Times or Le Monde or other international publications where like a local Swedish 25-year-old who just happens to take nice photos of the clear cuts isn't going to be able to do that in the beginning and turn that into a story. Like now it's hopefully it's enough of a story. Not we played one part of this, but obviously there's a huge amount of other stuff going on in Sweden as well that's helping to drive this, and there's thousands of people trying to bring attention to this. And the more of a life it gets of its own, like the easier it's going to be, I think for other people other photographers to have an impact with it as well.
Yeah.
And I think, that's...
And I think that's one of the good things about photography, and certainly nature photography, is that trend is like really changing now. I mean, you just have to look at the last Wildlife Photographer of the Year. I would say most of the categories now have conservation focused messages in. Of course, the beauty of behavior still has a place and is still important to wow people. But I think that's a good thing of a competition like that has such a big reach, has a responsibility in a way to send positive messaging. I think it's really interesting what you say about Sweden, because that's my vision of it. Wow, forest, lynx, bears, all these incredible birds. But yeah, you don't hear about the deforestation. I wanted to move on, and this is not a gotcha question, but I think it's a really interesting topic to discuss about, our carbon footprint as wildlife photographers. And, you must have a relatively big one, given you do a lot of traveling. And yeah, I wondered how you kind of reconcile that, what your thoughts are around it. And also, one of the things that I thought a positive thing that came from the pandemic is it did force photographers to do local stories, look at projects in their own backyard. And actually, now, well, for a number of years, you're having perfectly good Indian-based wildlife photographers and filmmakers producing good content from India and Africa and these places. So yeah, that idea of travel now, perhaps 10, 15 years ago, was exotic, and now maybe there's a little bit of guilt around it. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I mean, so in general, I think guilt is not a very useful emotion, just like regret. It's if you feel like you need to change something about how you live, then you do. I think we all try to live as good a life as we can. I'm honestly not that concerned about the flying for a number of reasons. I mean, climate change being a hoax. No, I'm just kidding. that would be a scoop for you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
No, so
it would be my most listened to podcast.
Yeah, exactly. At least I know, like,
Marcus, you've just put your MAGA hat on.
Yeah, that's right. No, but for a couple of reasons, like, I mean, even talking about climate change itself, flying, it's bad on an individual level. It's not what's gonna, it's not what's driving the planet down the toilet. And I don't think people are going to stop doing it. But that's not really the main reason. Though the main reason is that I think there's, climate change is one issue. It's not the only one. It's obviously a hugely important one. But as someone, who's mostly traditionally been working in Africa, like, it's as important as it is, like biodiversity loss, habitat loss, like there are other really important questions. And the thing is that, what complicates this, and this doesn't translate well to social media and to the way things tend to be now, as we talked about, like not so nuanced, right? Like, conservation in much of Africa is entirely dependent in many cases on international tourism. And so shaming people into not flying might have other unintended consequences, which doesn't mean that I don't think we should be flying less. It's just that, like, those are the trips that I think are actually worthwhile doing. And I would love to see, like, higher fees, depending on how far you've flown. Like, imagine if visa costs could be proportional to, like, the class and distance that you flew, and that money would actually go to conservation projects. Like, that would be amazing. So yeah, I do think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and it becomes, it's not that you shouldn't try to lower your footprint. I think, of course, you should, but you do also have to look at, like, the net benefit, pros and cons of the work you're doing. And I mean, I haven't been on, like, a holiday since before I started working, right? Like, I fly a lot, but I fly because I'm working, and I don't really have any serious doubts that I have, I'm a net benefit to the questions that I'm working on. For me, what worries me about flying is not so much how much we're flying, it's that we are treating flights and many other things as, I don't know, it's almost like just as part of consumption, right? Like, it's not. I remember growing up, and you're a few years older than me, but we're kind of same generation. Like, when we grew up, like, flying abroad was a huge deal, right? Like, now it's not something that you just like, oh, I'm bored, I'm just going to book a flight to Vienna for the weekend. So for me, it's not so much the flying itself, it's more how we have been transformed as a society, and the treating flights like that is one aspect of it, but it's just the general pattern of just taking things for granted and not thinking about our decisions and what we're doing. And
and it's a consumption issue, and it's also a subsidy issue. If you look, like you say, it's can cost you at the right time, if you book at if you call it the right time, the cheapest time, £10-20 to fly to Vienna for the weekend, it would probably cost you £1,000 to get there by train.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit the same as you're looking at, like, dairy versus plant-based alternatives, right? Like, one industry is much more heavily subsidized than the other one, and it's not the one that benefits the environment. So it's,
of course,
so there's a lot of changes I think we need to make, but yeah, like, for me personally, and again, I don't, like, when we talked before about kindness and things, right? And I kind of feel the same way about a lot of these things. Like, no matter what I feel about them personally, there are ways of going about things, and attacking people. Maybe it has its place, and maybe it's necessary to help drive some questions, but you're not going to change anyone's mind by calling them an idiot. Like, you're just not. Like,
yeah, of course,
not going to happen. If anything, you're just going to get everyone to dig down deeper. And
of course,
and I do think there needs to be space for talking about these things. So with flying specifically, I would love to see more conversation about just thinking about what impact can we have positively on the ground of the places that we go to, as opposed to, you're a terrible person because you got on an airplane. Maybe charter tourism is what we should be, or unnecessary business trips is what we should be concerned about first, and not like wildlife tourism in Africa that actually, a lot of the time has really consequential effects in a positive way as well. Not that it always does, but
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned during that, and I think it's a great answer, by the way.
Yeah, very short and concise.
Yeah. You said you hadn't had a holiday in 10 years, and I've mentioned I've got a business advisor who I see once a year, and we've become friends over the last 15 years or so. And one of the things that she always talks about with new clients is what you're going to do about taking time off, because she knows that freelancers are incredibly passionate, and there's always so much work to do, but you do need to recharge your batteries. So what do you do? Are you good? Are you good at giving yourself a break? Are you good at taking time off? Because it sounds like it's also pretty intense work, and also in some inhospitable places and dangerous places, and that's got a stress to it. And so we need to de-stress. Yeah,
I'm not a very stressed person, so I tend to be pretty good mental state, like even in the field, and even working in the field, like, it's very intense work. A lot of the time, I don't usually have 4 photojournalism assignments like back to back. Like, again, the variety does help. Like, different types of jobs work in very different ways. I mean, they all make you tired, but for different reasons, right? But some of them are much more relaxing, if you will, than others. Climate makes a big difference as well. I don't know. Like, I'm very much in the moment, right? So when I'm at home, I am fully at home. Like, I might be working on stuff, but I don't miss being in the field. When I'm in the field, like, I miss my wife, but I'm very happy being where I am, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. But when I'm here, like when we lived in Sweden for a couple of years, if it was that half of the year, I would just, within 20 minutes of arriving back at our place, we were renting my parents the guest house of their summer house for a couple of years. So we lived in the forest, an actual forest, not a plantation. I would just go out in the forest and picking berries or foraging for mushrooms or going down to the lake and sitting there. And yeah, I love it. And same as when we're here, I love getting up in the morning. I have my little morning routine here. Jess tends to sleep a little bit longer than me. So I wake up when the sun goes up, and I go and I open the door and I sit with a cup of coffee and I listen to birds that I have no idea what they are, but they're nice. I love being there, and I love going for walks here and checking up in the local. There's not much local wildlife, but we've got some frogs and there's some birds nesting on the edge. And I'm here, and I love being here. I'm not. I've never been someone who seeks out like excitement in that sense. I don't need the adrenaline rush of having a gun pointed at me. It's quite unfortunate when it happens, but it's not. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, you paint a very tranquil picture of your life in Portugal. It does sound very nice. You're sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee.
Yeah, even when it's hectic in some ways, of course it is, and there's always some things we can be concerned about, right? Including like the next job, or like getting everything right on the tax declaration, or whatever it might be, right? But even when I basically didn't have a home, I think I just tried to be mindful as much as possible, both of how I was doing. I always kind of figured that the moment that I'm sitting at home and just getting itchy feet, like that's when I need to start really having a good look at what I'm doing, because if I can't be fully present at home, and if I'm not satisfied with that, then maybe there's something with my inner balance that's a bit off. But as long as I'm happy doing my thing in the field, and then I'm happy being at home, then I think I'm okay.
Yeah, a healthy balance. And I think that's interesting. Talking about 2012 was the year you, I guess, not started, but you talked about doing this road trip. So we're like just over 10 years from that now. Do you think about the next 10 years? Do you think about what you'd like to do or even like 1, 3, 5 years?
Man, the way our industry is going, who knows? Like,
Yeah, Marcus and I had a little chat about AI earlier. Not that we're in any way experts, but I've been diving into it a little bit. And I'm perhaps a little bit fearful of it. But Marcus is less fearful because, you talked about this authenticity thing. We could maybe talk about that for a little bit.
The first thing I would say is just, I think in general, we have a tendency to, I think it's good trying to influence things, but we do have a tendency to fight things when they do seem quite inevitable. A lot of the time, like we get upset about things that are changing, as opposed to focusing on, okay, well, what can we do to influence this, and how can we, if not take advantage of it, but at least kind of change with the times. And I think this is one of those things, right? It's going to happen. Like it is happening already. You just have to accept it. It's a little bit like improved camera technology, or more people using camera traps or drones. Like you just have to accept that this is the way things are going, and then how can we make that work for us, and how can we if we can like influence it to be something positive as opposed to something negative. So I think we just first of all just have to accept that this, things are changing very fast. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing in a couple of years. Like I hope I'm going to be doing something similar to now, but who knows, right? But yeah, like you said, we were chatting about the what's been happening lately in AI and where it's likely to go.
I was telling Marcus about this amazing campaign I saw with IKEA in Patagonia, and these beautiful images of these products that hadn't been made yet, set in this vast mountain wilderness, and no one actually was there. No one was taking the pictures. There was no assistance, no lighting, all generated. And so, you do start to think, well, lots of people, I'm working with a director on a film at the moment, and he's really into all of this stuff. He's actually got another project doing a film about data, big data and AI. And so he's really, dove deep into this, and this idea of like, okay, so what jobs are going to be like around? So for example, a lawyer, like, if you and I want to start up a photography business, and maybe we need a one-page contract, and normally that thing might cost €1,000 or whatever. we could just go into ChatGPT, write a contract, and maybe need to pay a lawyer to go over it, but you could pay them £300. So all of that paperwork, could just be gone. Photography, you just generated everything on AI. I mean, I think it's just like manual labor work, but then the robots will take over that. Who knows? So, and I watched this great film, and one of the slides that came up in this presentation was that 50% of AI engineers believe that there's a 10% chance that this is the extinction of humanity. Now, when you hear these things, my conspiracy meter sort of, oh yeah, that whatever. But these guys gave a really good case for it. They said if you were about to get on a plane and 50% of those engineers that made that plane said there's a 10% chance it's going to go down, you probably wouldn't get on the plane, right? So yeah, we definitely need to be, I'm kind of excited and worried at the same time about all of this stuff.
For sure. And I think there's so, one thing I just try to do for myself, right, is to not worry about things that I can control, and then you focus, right? Not that this makes me unique, right? But you try to focus on the things that you have some influence over. But I don't necessarily mean just in trying to fix them, but try to like train your mind to really not worry about things that are outside of your control anyway. And I seem to have gotten some of the way there, which is probably why I don't stress out too often. But in terms of this stuff, we may have been gloating slightly about the fact that the photographers were more likely to lose their jobs are the very, very highly paid ones in the commercial sphere. Because as you said, like IKEA, they're not going to, it's not important to them whether it's a genuine photograph in an advertisement. Like it doesn't make any difference. That sector, I think may be in slightly more trouble, but I think there's always going to be a demand for authenticity. My feeling is that the more we get flooded with this stuff and people don't know, real from fake or
I guess like what happened in the Sony Photo Awards recently. Exactly. Yeah, for example. For anyone who doesn't know, there was an image in the Sony Photo Awards last month that was AI generated, and the guy actually won, and it was his plan to win, so then he could expose, not expose the competition, but just really just show this is what's going to
start a conversation about it. Yeah. But I do suspect that what I hope will happen, there's a lot of people who are not going to care whether something is fake or not fake, right? But what I suspect will happen is as it gets more and more confusing and more difficult to tell, people will turn to the institutions or companies or individuals that they feel like they can trust. Yeah. So, if you get your news from one place and you feel fairly sure that they probably do their due diligence and they're not going to publish videos unless it was taken by one of their journalists that they can trust, well, then I can probably, I can trust that more than I can trust anything else. And so I think, if you're able to build a reputation of someone who's trustworthy and with integrity, I think we might actually be in quite a good position in the future, because I think people are going to want that. And I think the field of photography and video that we're in is always going to be dependent on real material. Like an NGO that needs to show its donors what it's doing is not going to be happy with AI generated material, because that doesn't tell anyone anything. And I guess it's a little bit like, just because Hollywood does well, it hasn't meant that BBC wildlife documentaries don't. There's always going to be a demand for wanting to see the real thing as well. So I don't know. I don't think that this is the end of things. Who knows? But I think there's going to be some silver lining to this. And I think this is going to not blow over, but I think it's just things are changing so fast. Like right now, it's maybe very cool that you can generate these things, but once everyone can do it at home in 10 seconds, it's going to lose a lot of its value and a lot of its interest.
Yeah, I think also what you said about agencies, NGOs, people that you work with seeking authenticity goes back to what we were talking about being more than just a photographer. Is actually being, a kind of a mini institution with yourself and like, oh yeah, let's go to Marcus because he's delivered for us in the past, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, which is in some ways, I think, is probably more important than ever to maintain your integrity and your reputation in that sense, like both as a professional, but also just as a person. Because I mean, maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I do think that it's not going to matter less in the future. I think that it's easy to think that when you're being flooded with material, that the important thing is to be unique and stand out. And I think that's been true to some extent with the growth of digital and then mirrorless technology, because that's just meant more photographs being available. But this is not more photographs. Like this is something else. And I don't think that's, yeah, sure. Like maybe it's not good for Instagram. Like, maybe you get fewer likes because, there's just more stuff to look at, a little bit like what already started with people who are creating stuff in Photoshop and, putting in different skies. And, this is just continuing that trend. But I don't know that that's really, as a profession, like whether that's going to impact like photojournalism. I don't know. I don't think so. But
well, look, while we both still have a profession, and like
right. There might be other reasons for why they go down the toilet. Just
yeah, you just get old and your eyes don't work so well. Your pictures start getting soft.
Yeah,
people like sort of politely move you to one side. We need someone younger now, Marcus.
I mean, look, in some ways, I'd be more concerned, I guess, about the writing aspect of this, right? Because you don't have to have been somewhere to write about it. Like a lot of pieces get written by editors sitting behind a desk in London or Stockholm or New York anyway, and then you just combine it with stock images and voila, you have your story of 10 places to go. Like there's a difference between doing like a proper story about your own experience, but if you can generate that and just combine it with real photos, let's see. And it's not like writing has been a lucrative profession for a little while now. So
yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly.
We'll find out.
Listen, we're going to wrap up, and I was going to say, while we've still got jobs and sort of for the foreseeable future, can you talk a little bit about what your plans are for the rest of 2023? What are you excited about? What's next on your list for Marcus Westberg?
2023 it's still a lot of time.
Yeah.
Well, no,
it goes fast though, doesn't it? Oh my goodness.
It does, yeah. And especially when you think it's like, oh well, now it's a third of the year that's gone, or now it's oh my god, like it's almost half the year. Yeah. So while I'm here, I'll work on bits and pieces, but I'm heading to South Africa. One of my regular clients is a big private reserve with this climate change and ecosystem research center. So I'll spend a few weeks there. I've got a couple of stories to do in Tajikistan, and I've started working on a collaboration with a really interesting organization. So we're making a kind of an educational book. They film lessons on quite broad themes, and they have, I think, 250,000 students around the world. And yeah, so we're going to do something there. So, leadership, flexibility, value-based, basically, but using photographs to illustrate that and tell the stories from the field. So it'll be fun. And then for the rest of it, I mean, I have some things that I'm sure will happen at some point, but I don't really know exactly. Usually my schedule tends to fill up, once it gets to within a month or two.
Yeah.
So
that's exciting. And actually you did mention, I read this on your website. We haven't talked about it, that you've had images published in other people's books, but you're working on your own book as well.
Oh, was that? You see, well, I haven't updated this website for
you've now dumped that idea. You realize there's no money in books.
Yeah.
People, postage is a nightmare. Like, forget it.
No, I mean, look, I get a lot of requests and questions about that, and I did actually, maybe I still do, like, had a deal with a really nice publisher in Stockholm who were really keen. And I'm sure I haven't gotten back to them for the last 2 years. It's just one of those things that always ends up on the back burner. I'm really keen on collaborations and projects and stuff, but when it's purely your own and it's never urgent, it just always ends up on the back burner. So I'm very good, like if I'm collaborating on a project, I'm very good at keeping deadlines and delivering what I've been told or asked to deliver. But if I don't have a deadline because it's my project, then it just seems to drift off into the far distance somewhere. So it'll happen at some point, but maybe this educational one will be a compromise, because what I want to work with, there's a structure to it, and there's a purpose to it in a very different way. And if that works out, then we'll see what the next step is.
Well, Marcus, we look forward to that and all your other work, and it's been so great talking to you finally and catching up. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. No, it's been great. And as you said, I've been a fan for a long time. I don't think there's any episodes that I haven't listened to. So happy to be on it.
That's great. And now with your humble self, will you scream and shout about your own podcast on social media?
I'd rather let you do that, but
I'll do that bit for sure. Well, look, I can't wait to get this out. And yeah, thanks so much again.
My pleasure, and thanks for doing this. It's I have to say, I mean, I know you were saying goodbyes now, but I will make one addition and just
sure,
because we talked before, right, about this. Even though it's a team effort a lot of the time. You're often working with a team, but it's not usually with other photographers, right? Like you're working with publishers if it's for a book, or you're working with people on the ground if you're covering a conservation project. But this podcast, I think, has been a really nice way to hear the stories of a lot of other people, in our industry, in our field, because it's not necessarily what you hear even when you meet them. You're not going to sit down and be like, right, well, okay, for 1 hour, you tell me your life story and then I'll tell you mine. It's great meeting people, but it's usually at events and stuff, right? So it's more chit chat, or it's about something very specific. So I've really enjoyed your podcast from when I first stumbled on it. I had an idea at some point I was going to do a podcast before I knew about yours. I even recorded a couple of episodes, and then I got to yours. And I was like, oh no, but there's already one, so I'll just listen to that instead.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, look, if I have a sick day, you can take over as the host.
If I remember to stop talking and actually ask questions at some point.
No, you know what, Marcus, I really appreciate that. And, it's definitely a labor of love doing this. I did look a few years ago at seeing how I could monetize it or maybe get some advertising. And it just, I think it's the kind of thing that you have to do all the time. And, I do a handful of these a year, maybe 5 or 6. And for me, it's just been an amazing way of meeting people like you and all the other great guests that I've had. And that's, we talk about the variety. I really enjoy doing them. Great opportunity to meet people. And, there's a value in that. There's not a monetary value in it, but there's a networking value. And I know that you're not the only one. There's, maybe another handful of people out there that really enjoy it.
So, I think one thing that I think we need to get better at in general is just, when we think something nice, we should say it. And I think we forget, right? Like, or maybe it feels awkward reaching out for people. But I mean, I would suspect that there's far more than a handful of people who find this podcasting incredibly valuable and interesting, and who, like me, think that you should probably do one a week. But
yeah,
then you might have to monetize it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
thanks again.
I'll let you go now, or you will let me go, I guess. It's your show.
It's my show. We'll wrap it up again. Marcus, thanks so much. You've been a great guest, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks so much, Matt. We'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Many thanks to Marcus. What a lovely guy, kindred spirit, and doing some really great work across many different platforms and making a difference. I love too that he and Staffan, previous guest on this podcast, episode number 15, if you want to go back and take a listen. I love that they have also chosen to focus on issues close to home. All too often, I think we can look outside the West for big environmental destruction stories, but it's frequently the case that things are just as bad at home, right here on our doorsteps. So to find out more about Marcus, head over and check out the links on the podcast page on my website, and reach out. He's a really friendly guy, really engaging, very generous of spirit, and I was so thankful to finally interview him. So what's new from me this month? Well, I've definitely kicked the fatigue. I had some lovely emails about that, which was really nice and encouraging to read. I am continuing to visit the cemetery and things are looking so beautiful there right now. Green, lush. I've seen fox cubs, heard kestrels and sparrowhawks, and just being there is a total joy. Speaking of joy, we are thrilled to announce that our book, Fox, Neighbor, Villain, Icon, won the Gold Award in the photography category of the Independent Publisher Book Awards out of the States. So that is super exciting. Yeah, I'd mentioned in a post just after all the hard work and having a bit of space from the book being published, it's really, really lovely to get that recognition. And Keith, our editor, big congratulations to him because he scored a 1-2 editing our book and also David Lloyd's new book. That got a silver medal. And he also got a gold award together with his new book with Britta Yashinsky, also previous guest on this podcast, for their new book called The Evidence Project, which is incredible. I just picked up my copy, so I highly recommend you check that out. It's beautifully produced on uncoated paper, and it's another collaborative effort following on from Photographers Against Wildlife Crime. So definitely go and check that out. And yeah, I hope you're all well and enjoying spring wherever you are, and stay tuned. We've got more guests lined up. I've just secured another really exciting guest. And thanks again for listening. All the best and see you soon.